So I know you wrote a popular article in JSTOR Daily on translating these racy bits in the Bible. Who is this Tamar character that you write about? What can you tell us about her? This person we rarely ever talk about in a setting like Sunday school.
Yeah, so one of the fun parts about writing that little piece is, well, and actually I could actually point to you that I think we have different Bible translations here,
Okay.
right?
I have the NRSV.
And I have the Jewish Study Bible, which is the New Jewish Publication Society translation. I mean, there aren't that many differences, but certainly a translation is a kind of interpretation.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. And one of the ways I thought would be really interesting to start that little piece on what are our politics of translating the Bible would be to look at Genesis 19.
Okay.
And it would be interesting actually to see what translation you have there in Genesis 19. Because I promise I'm getting to your question about Tamar, but
which is what we're all waiting to hear. Okay. Which verse?
Let's see here. So this is when two angels come to Sodom,
Okay,
right? Mm-hmm. And they're being taken in. They're trying to keep the townspeople are sort of banging on the door, and they say something, right? So what is it that they say?
Right. That is a very
problematic
verse.
Here. Okay, so this is verse 5. And they shouted to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us." And then the question is what follows there, right? The Hebrew is that we may know them. We like biblically know,
right?
Like to biblically know someone, we know what that means, right? And it is a circumlocution or a euphemism, right? But what's really interesting is the politics of this particular translation, because it says here, "Bring them out to us that we may be intimate with them." What is intimacy?
It's really interesting. That loads the term with all sorts of things, I think that, I don't know. I'm not sure are being communicated here.
Right. Well, intimacy implies, I think, consent, right? Which is not what is being depicted here. So that was sort of what started me off on talking about what are the racier bits or the parts that we smooth over when we're talking about the biblical text because we have an aesthetic of translation, right? That it's holy or scriptural.
Well, so here, all the NRSV says is the know them. It's a literal.
Yeah, right. It's just a sort of direct kind of translation from the Hebrew that also it itself is a circumlocution. But then this sort of led me to think about different characters that aren't brought up. And there's one such character who actually shows up in at least two different stories who are not the same character, and this is Tamar. So in Genesis 38, we have a Tamar character. It's sort of like this character that appears for the episode and then like disappears after, and then we never hear of her again.
It was bad writing.
Yeah, it was just
it was just bad story writing.
Yeah, it's just like when someone shows up in a
TV show.
Yeah, and it's like
what
they show
happened
up,
to Tamar?
and then they didn't like talk, like the whole episode's about them, and then they never show up in subsequent episodes. So it's sort of the case that one Tamar shows up in Genesis 38 as the daughter-in-law of Judah, and then another one shows up as David's daughter in 2 Samuel 13, and there's been a lot of sort of like low-level discussion about are these two characters sort of related in the literary tradition? Okay. Is there a kind of chronological, could we say one text is taking from another text and doing like fan fiction? And then there's another way of thinking about it, which is what is unifying these two stories? Because they're two totally different Tamars. So as I said, in Genesis 38, Tamar is Judah's daughter-in-law. And have you ever heard of the Black Widow?
No.
She's like a woman who kills off all of her husbands.
Right, yes.
Right. Okay, so Tamar is this like sort of quintessential, like all of her husbands are dying off and no one knows why, right? So the first, so Judah has 3 sons. The first son just dies because God didn't like him, which is also a sort of way of saying he died young. The second one marries her because of this concept.
Levirate marriage? Okay.
Yes. levirate marriage. This idea that the male line of the firstborn will be continued through the brother,
Okay.
right? But he doesn't want to do that. I wonder if you can guess, maybe, like why a brother wouldn't want to actually produce an heir.
Through his brother's
Yeah.
wife.
Yeah.
I mean, there are any number of reasons. Some modern and some not. I mean,
Right. I mean, besides the icky factor,
right. I mean, is he afraid he's going to die?
I mean, that might be one.
Because she's a black widow.
Yeah.
Okay.
He does end up dying anyway, so I guess that
Right,
one
that didn't work out. Yeah.
Yeah, that one didn't work out for him. I think it actually has to do with inheritance, right? So the son would still be considered of the firstborn and not actually
I see,
his.
not his own.
So that would diminish his estate, as it were, because the firstborn gets a double portion. So he dies because he spills his seed. That's a big no-no. And so Judah says, well, I only have one.
Spills his seed, meaning
Oh, it's a withdrawal method.
I'm getting to the nitty-gritty. Yeah.
Yeah.
He refuses to impregnate her.
Yes.
And then
Yes,
this
withdrawal
is
method.
disapproved.
Right. And actually his name is Onan, which is where
Right.
the term
Onanism comes
comes
from.
from. Yeah. Okay. So Judah's like, okay, I've lost 2 sons. I only have one left. He's definitely not going to marry her. But he doesn't tell this to Tamar. He sends her back to her father's house and says, he's too young. The youngest is too young. Wait until he grows up, and then, I'll set you all up. Well, he grows up, and Tamar notices, well, arrangements still haven't been made. So she takes matters into her own hands. And by this point, Judah's wife had died. So his needs were not being met. And he goes, on a trip, and his daughter-in-law wraps herself in a scarf and pretends to be a prostitute by the side of the road. Of course, a sort of like interesting tidbit of this story is that no one seems to judge the fact that Judah is going off hanging out with
Right,
prostitutes.
right.
It's like no big deal. But that's just like an aside.
So it's like an assumed double standard.
Of course,
Yes.
yeah, of course. So he cohabits with her, and of course, as in any sort of like good unfolding of a biblical story, she's impregnated, right, by this one act. And of course, Judah then finds out. So Judah finds out that she was impregnated. But there's a trick here, which is that this is his child, right? And what was the point of levirate marriage in the first place?
So that you could continue that line.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like, what better than to go back to the source, right? So actually Tamar is saving the family by performing this sort of quasi-incestuous, just like not true incest, but it's among the sort of prohibited.
Yeah. And under the guise of prostitution.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. So like, no one wants their daughter-in-law to, even pretend to be a prostitute even for a day. So this is the first Tamar. The first Tamar sort of saves the line of Judah through this act, through this transgressive act. We have another Tamar, who's David's daughter in 2 Samuel 13. And she is actually, in many ways, very different because she's raped by her brother. But this is also part of the story of David, right? So like David had actually destroyed another man's family previous to this event, right? He had lusted after Bathsheba,
Right.
after seeing her, take her clothes off. He arranged for her husband to be killed and then took her for himself, right? And so Nathan the prophet basically communicates to David, well, what you have done, which is destroyed another person's family, will be done to you. The sword will never leave the midst of your house.
So this is a consequence of that.
Yeah, it's just
I
sort of like
see, okay.
it's sort of how David's fall is catalyzed through his whole family sort of coming apart at the seams from the inside, and Tamar is part of this.
So there's like a replication of violence and violent sex
Yeah.
in the story of that. Okay.
Yeah. And so what becomes really interesting is, how do we have these two Tamar figures? How are they related? Well, they're actually related through incestuous acts, right? We have Tamar in Genesis 38, the daughter-in-law of Judah, who is sort of playing the salvific role for Israel. And then the Tamar who is, without her consent, drawn into an incestuous act, which tears the family apart because her other brother, Absalom, is going to kill Amnon, who raped her. So that's, tearing the family apart. And that's what sort of brings these two Tamar figures together. And this is just like a tiny little tidbit that I want to add, because I don't know if you know this. Have you ever planted date palm trees?
Never in my life.
It's not like a common thing that we do.
Oh, yesterday. I planted, while I was planting date palm trees, yes.
Well, I mean, like, there are all these weird forums on the internet where you can look up, different tidbits of planting advice. And it turns out that the date palm actually has a really unusual root system that is invasive. So it's not like other trees where the roots grow sort of wide as they grow deep. Even a young date palm will grow very, very wide roots that are very invasive. So like all of these fora on the internet will say, plant your date palm, such and such like meters away from other bushes, so that they don't get sort of eaten up. So this is what's sort of like the interesting idea. Tamar is a date palm. The name Tamar means date palm. And this is a kind of botanical image, I think, that lies behind this sort of incestuous figure that can either save a family through the roots gathering in and not allowing another, person to be cut off or cut down, or to actually destroy it through that sort of...
So I will just, in the genealogy of Jesus, we have Tamar show up in the Matthean genealogy. So she is one of 4 interesting women that are part of the genealogy and break up the patriarchal line. So, and Jesus is said to be a son of David from the line of Judah. So it's interesting to think and read all of these things of Tamar into that particular story.
Yeah, and I will say that, like, the key here is actually the story of Ruth. Right? Because Ruth, at the end, is extending the genealogy at the end of the story of Tamar in Genesis 38. That genealogy is extended in the story of Ruth, which is, the subject for another longer discussion.
Absolutely.
It's interesting how these literary traditions sort of get carried on through the story and sort of reshaped over and over again.